Why some places feel like home instantly. Carl Jung observed that the psyche carries a history far older than any single life, and that recognition can arrive fully formed in a body before a single memory has ever been attached to it. Jung wrote, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." That is from his essay, collected in Civilization in Transition, and he would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The recognition you feel walking into a certain kitchen, or standing at the top of a certain staircase, or smelling rain on a certain kind of stone wall. That recognition is not coming from the part of you that keeps your calendar and remembers your childhood address. It is coming from the other one, the older one, the one who was never told where you grew up, because it does not care. It is answering to something underneath your biography, and that is why the feeling can be so strange and so complete at once, warm and slightly vertiginous, like meeting a face you have never seen and already trusting it. So here is where I begin, and I want to be simple about it. I say, there are rooms in me I have never furnished. There are shapes in me older than my own story, and when a place matches one of those shapes, something in me stands up before I have decided anything. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. And again, I make the unconscious conscious. If you are still here, let this teaching find you again tomorrow. So, consider staying close by subscribing before we go on. Before the first key, do this one small thing. Type the 2 words, "face it," in the comments. Just those 2 words. Let it be a marker that you are willing to look at what usually only gets felt. The first key is, the feeling of home is recognition without content. And I want you to sit with how odd that actually is. You walk into a stranger's cottage, or a rented room in a city you have never visited, and something in your chest says, "Oh, there you are." But there is no there. No memory to point to, no photograph, no story that explains it. And Jung's answer to this puzzle was not mystical in the way people like to make it sound. It was structural. He taught that beneath the layer of memories that belong only to you, there is a deeper layer that does not belong only to you, an inherited layer of forms, and these forms are empty until life fills them. Jung put it this way, speaking of the deep patterns of the psyche. He wrote that they are inherited only as regards their form. That line comes from his essay on the Archetypes in Collected Works Volume 9, Part 1, and it means exactly what it says. The form is old, the picture is new. So when a room has the right proportions, the right hush, the right slant of afternoon light falling across a worn table, it is not that you lived there before. It is that the form fits a shape that was already waiting inside you, unfurnished, unnamed, patient. This is why the feeling arrives before thought. Thought is slow, form recognition is instant, like a key turning in a lock built long before the key existed. Imagine a woman looking at 2 apartments in the same week. The first is objectively the better one, more light, a better street, a lower price, and she walks through it feeling nothing at all, polite, indifferent, checking boxes. The second apartment is smaller, the paint is tired, the landlord apologizes for the noise from the street, and the moment she steps through the door, something in her goes quiet and full at once. She has never stood in that room before in her life, and yet some part of her has clearly been here. She cannot say when, she cannot say why, and this is exactly the gap Jung is pointing to. The ego cannot produce this feeling, because the ego has no file for it, no date, no name. It is the older resident answering a knock the newer tenant never heard. Notice this. The next time it happens to you, notice that you do not reason your way into the feeling. You do not weigh the evidence and arrive at recognition the way you would arrive at a decision about rent or light or price. You are simply already standing inside the feeling before your thinking has caught up enough to explain it. And that gap, between no memory and total recognition, is the doorway this whole video is going to walk you through. I say, what I recognize in a place is not its history, it is my own shape. The second key is, the pattern is empty until you or your culture pours a picture into it. And this is where people get archetypes wrong. They imagine some fixed picture living in the collective unconscious, a specific house, a specific hearth, waiting to be found on earth like a lost twin. But that is not what Jung taught at all. He was careful, almost stubborn about this distinction. The archetype itself has no content. It is a riverbed, not the water. It is the shape a longing takes, not the object of the longing. So the archetype of shelter can be filled by a Tuscan farmhouse for one person and a Brooklyn walk-up for another, and a tent by a lake for a third. All three feel like home with equal force, because the form underneath, enclosure, warmth, a boundary against the wide, indifferent world, a hearth at the center, is the same old pattern, only dressed differently by two different lives. And I want you to notice how much this explains. That used to look like coincidence. Imagine two sisters raised in the very same house. One grows up and cannot rest until she owns a cottage with low-beamed ceilings and small deep-set windows. The other grows up and cannot rest until she has a loft with glass walls and no curtains at all, and each one, standing in her own chosen space, feels the identical unearned peace the other feels in hers. They would tell you their homes have nothing in common, and on the surface they are right, but underneath, both women built an enclosure, both built a boundary against the wide, indifferent world. One simply poured that old form into stone and beams, the other poured it into glass and height. The riverbed was the same, only the water took a different shape on its way down. This is also why you can walk into two rooms that look almost identical on paper, same square footage, same furniture catalogue, and feel completely at home in one, and strangely hollow in the other, because the archetype is not satisfied by appearance. It is answered only by proportion, by rhythm, by some quality underneath the decorating that either matches the old pattern or does not. Think of the mother archetype here for a moment, not the personal mother, the pattern of enclosing, nourishing, holding space. A place can activate that pattern through walls thick enough to keep out weather, through a low ceiling that gathers warmth close, through a fire or a stove at the center of the floor plan. None of this requires you to have any conscious thought about mothers at all. The pattern works underneath thought. That is precisely its power, and precisely why it can ambush you in a rented room, in a country where you do not even speak the language. And here is a smaller example. Closer to an ordinary week than any cottage in Tuscany, think of the particular relief you feel closing a heavy curtain against a cold window at night, or pulling a blanket up around your shoulders on a couch while rain moves against the glass. That tiny domestic ritual is the same old pattern working at a miniature scale. Enclosure, warmth, a boundary drawn against the wide world, performed in seconds, in your own living room, with nothing ancient about the furniture at all. I want you to notice something practical here. Pause for a moment and think of one place, just one, that gave you that instant unearned peace. And ask not what happened there. Ask instead what shape it had. Was it enclosed? Was it high? Was it near water? Was it dim or bright? Was there a threshold you had to cross? That shape is closer to the truth than any story you could tell about the place. I say, the pattern is old, the picture is only ever borrowed. The third key is, and here I want to slow down and tell you the story that changed the direction of Jung's whole life. In the winter of 1909, Jung recalled a dream of a house, his house, but not quite. In the dream he was on the upper floor, a handsome salon furnished in a fine old style, and he thought to himself, not bad. And then he noticed the ground floor was older still, medieval, the furnishings darker, more somber, and he thought, now this is curious. I had not realized this floor existed, and he went further down and found a stone stairway leading to a cellar with vaulting that looked Roman, and beneath that, cut into the living rock, he found a low cave with scattered bones and broken pottery, remnants of a primitive culture, and finally two ancient skulls, half disintegrated. And this dream, which he told to Freud in Vienna, became the moment Jung began to see the psyche not as a single flat room, but as a structure of descending floors, each one older than the one above it, built by different hands in different centuries, and never fully torn down, only built over. Now hold that image steady for a moment. because I think most people walk through their own inner house believing it has only one floor, the one they are currently standing on. They think the self is the furniture they chose, the opinions they hold today, the story they tell at dinner parties, and they forget entirely that beneath the floor they are standing on, there is another floor, and beneath that one, another, going down and down until the boards give way to stone, and the stone gives way to bare rock. Imagine, for a moment, a woman visiting her husband's grandmother's farmhouse for the first time, a house she has never once set foot in before this evening, and as she steps through the low doorway into the kitchen, something in her goes suddenly, strangely still, the flagstone floor, the black iron hooks above the hearth, the smell of wood smoke worked into the walls over 100 winters. None of it belongs to her personal history. She grew up in a city apartment 3 floors up, with radiators and thin walls, and yet standing here, she feels something closer to grief than surprise, a recognition with no photograph behind it. And if you asked Jung to explain this, he would not reach for the woman's own biography at all. He would say she has stepped, for a moment, off her own ground floor and onto a much older one, a floor that belongs less to her personal life and more to something shared, something that was standing long before her family tree had a single branch on it. This is the real weight of the house dream. It tells you that the psyche is not a single flat surface, but a structure with depth. Your top floor is the present, articulate, well-lit, easy to describe at a dinner party. Your ground floor is your personal unconscious, the forgotten arguments, the early griefs, the small humiliations that still shape you, though you no longer remember their faces, but the cellar, the cave, the bones beneath the rock. That is the collective unconscious, the part of the house that was standing before you moved in, before your family moved in, before anyone alive today moved in. And here is why I am telling you this story on a video about home. Because when a place feels like home instantly, it is very often reaching not the top floor, but one of the lower ones. It is touching the cellar. And this is why the feeling can feel so much bigger than your own biography, so much older than it has any right to be, given that you have, in fact, just arrived. Do this exercise this week. Take that one place from before, the one that gave you the instant unearned peace, and try to map it the way you would map a personal myth. Ask what floor of the house it seemed to reach. Was it merely comfortable, ground floor, familiar, or was it something stranger, something that made the hair rise slightly on your arms, something closer to the cave? Write down the physical details, the light, the smell, the sound or silence, and then write down the feeling word, not comfortable, not nice, but the true word, sacred, ancient, hushed, watched, held. That true word will tell you which floor of the house you were standing on. And do not be surprised if the word that comes to you is older and stranger than the room seems to deserve. That strangeness is not a mistake. It is the cellar telling you exactly how far down you went. I say, the deepest recognition in me is not memory, it is the cellar remembering the shape of stone. The fourth key is a correction, and I think it is the most important one in this whole video, because the instant home feeling is so vivid, so convincing, that people are tempted to literalize it. They say, I must have lived there in another life, or that town is my true destiny. And they build a whole plan around geography instead of psychology. Imagine a man who visits a village in another country on a holiday and feels the unmistakable ache of recognition, the narrow streets, the particular blue of the shutters, the bells at a certain hour, and he decides this is proof, this is fate. He sells what he has, he moves there within the year, and for a season it is wonderful, and then the ordinary weight of an unaddressed inner life follows him across the ocean, the way it always does, the same restlessness, the same old argument with himself, the same low hum of dissatisfaction he thought the move would cure, because the place was never the cure. The place was a doorway, and he walked through the doorway and then set up permanent residence in the doorway itself, refusing to go any further inward. And I want you to notice how ordinary this mistake is. It does not require selling your house and crossing an ocean. Imagine a woman who feels that same unearned peace one afternoon in a friend's cottage by a lake, and for years afterward, She measures every apartment she rents against that one afternoon. This one has the wrong light. This one has the wrong quiet. She is not house hunting anymore. She is archetype hunting. And no lease will ever satisfy a longing that was never really about square footage. This is the same error at a smaller scale, mistaking the size of the feeling for the size of the answer required. Jung was clear that the archetypal image is a signal pointing toward inner work. Not a real estate listing, it tells you something true about the shape your soul is hungry for. And then it goes quiet, waiting to see whether you will build that shape yourself or simply keep shopping for it in the outer world. The pattern in you does not want you to relocate. It wants you to build the enclosure, the warmth, the hearth, inside your own conscious life, wherever your body happens to be standing, whether that is a rented room, a childhood house you never left, or a city you swore you would only pass through. So the correction is this: the feeling is real, and its message is real, but its message was never about longitude and latitude. It was never asking you to find the right coordinates on a map. It was asking you to become, in your own daily life, the kind of enclosure that place only imitated for an afternoon. I say, the place was a doorway. I will not mistake it for the house. Let something in you settle for just a moment here, if this teaching is worth carrying forward. Subscribing means tomorrow's key finds you without you having to go looking for it. That is all I ask, and now we go deeper into the key that carries the most weight of anything I will tell you tonight. The fifth key is the deepest one, and I want to walk it in 4 pieces, because it will not fit into a single breath. So first, consider the archetype most often underneath this particular kind of homecoming feeling, which is the mother archetype in its widest sense. Not the personal mother you had or wished you had, but the ancient pattern of enclosure and nourishment that Jung found running through myth after myth: the cave, the walled garden, the vessel, the hollow in the hillside, the hut with smoke rising from its roof. When a place gives you walls that hold warmth, a low light, a sense of being gathered rather than exposed, it is very often this pattern being touched. And this is worth knowing, because it explains why so many people describe their instant home feeling using the language of relief: a held breath finally let out, a tightness in the shoulders finally releasing. That is the somatic signature of this particular archetype being constellated. The body knows before the mind does, and I want you to notice how physical this is. It is not a thought that arrives. It is a loosening in the chest, a slowing of the breath, a strange gratitude in the muscles themselves, long before you have found a single word for what you are feeling. Second, consider how you actually tell the difference between an archetypal recognition and a merely personal one, because not every warm feeling in a place is the seller speaking. Sometimes it is only the ground floor, only your own history. A kitchen that resembles your grandmother's kitchen will comfort you, and that comfort is real, but it is personal. It has an address. It has a name. Imagine a woman who moves into a small apartment and finds herself strangely at peace in the reading corner by the window, and at first she assumes it is only because the chair reminds her of one from her childhood. And that is part of it, but she notices something else too. A second, stranger feeling underneath the first. Not merely fondness, but something closer to reverence. A small held breath, every time she sits down there in the late afternoon light. That second layer is the one worth paying attention to, because the archetypal recognition is stranger than ordinary comfort. It has no address. It arrives with a slight uncanny charge, what Jung called the numinous. A feeling that is not simply pleasant, but somehow larger than the room containing it. A little awe mixed with the comfort. If you feel only warmth, you are likely on the ground floor. If you feel warmth, and also a small shiver of strangeness, as though something is watching you kindly from just out of sight, you are closer to the cellar. Learn to feel that difference in your own body, because it will save you from overreading every pleasant Airbnb or every charming rental listing as a message from the depths, when in fact, most of them are simply pleasant, and pleasant is allowed to be only pleasant. Third, consider what this feeling is actually asking of you. And here I want to offer you something you might not expect, because most people assume the archetypal home feeling is pointing backward, towards some imagined former life, some lost origin. But Jung also taught that the deep layer of the psyche is oriented toward what has not yet happened. He wrote of one of its clearest images, that the child is potential future, from Collected Works Volume 9, Part 1. Meaning the oldest patterns in you are not always relics. Some of them are seeds. So when a place gives you that shiver of homecoming, ask yourself honestly, is this asking me to remember something, or is it asking me to become something? Is this place showing me an enclosure I lost, or an enclosure I have not yet built, a life I have not yet dared to gather around myself, a warmth I have not yet made room for? Imagine a man standing in the doorway of a friend's small workshop, sawdust in the air, tools hung in careful rows, and feeling an ache he cannot explain. He has never built anything in his life, so it cannot be memory, but it might be a seed, a shape of concentration and craft that has been waiting quietly inside him for years, unused. This reframes the whole feeling. It stops being nostalgia for a life you never had, and starts being an invitation toward a life you have not yet lived. Fourth, and this is the piece I most want you to carry into your actual week, walk through an ordinary day with this awareness turned on, not searching for it, just noticing it. The 7 a.m. kitchen with coffee steam rising against morning light. Does anything in you settle there? The 2 p.m. park bench under a particular kind of tree, the 5 p.m. doorway of a friend's apartment, where the smell of dinner reaches you before the door even opens, the 10 p.m. quiet of your own room with one lamp lit against the dark. Log these small flickers for a week, not the big dramatic ones, the small ordinary ones. Because the archetype does not only live in Tuscan villages, it lives in a well-placed lamp, in a chair angled just right toward a window, in the particular hush of a room where you feel, for no earned reason, gathered rather than exposed. And once you start collecting these small flickers, you will notice something remarkable. You do not actually need to move continents to build the enclosure. You can build a great deal of it in the room you are already sitting in tonight, with nothing more than a chair moved 6 inches, a lamp turned warmer, a door you finally close against the noise of the day. I say, the pattern in me does not ask for a new country. It asks for a hearth I am willing to tend myself. The 6th key is the quiet one, the one that gathers everything else, and it is this: the deepest home was never a place at all. Jung spent much of his later writing circling toward what he called the self, the ordering center of the whole psyche, the thing individuation slowly builds toward across a lifetime. And I think this is the real secret behind why some places move us so much. They are not the destination. They are a mirror held up at exactly the right angle to show us, for one unguarded moment, what wholeness would feel like if we ever finished building it inside ourselves. That is why the feeling in these places is so bittersweet, so much like grief and joy at once, because part of you recognizes the shape of home, and another part of you knows, quietly, that the shape is not yet finished in here. In your own life, let me make this plain with an ordinary case. Imagine a woman living alone after a long marriage ends. Her apartment is clean, functional, entirely adequate, and entirely dead. She keeps the blinds half drawn out of habit. She eats standing at the counter, and then one evening, visiting a friend, she sits in a small reading chair by a lamp. Nothing special. Second-hand fabric, a crooked shade, and something in her exhales for the first time in months. She goes home and cannot explain the feeling. She almost books a flight somewhere, anywhere, thinking the ache must be about geography, and only later, much later, does she understand that what moved her was not the chair or the room at all. It was a glimpse of a life gathered instead of scattered, a life someone had troubled to arrange around a single warm point. So she buys a lamp. She chooses one chair and angles it toward the window. She stops eating standing up, and slowly, without ever leaving her own 4 walls, the ache quiets. Not because she found the place, but because she began, finally, to build it. This is not a sad ending. I want to be clear about that. It is closer to a compass reading. Every instant home feeling you have ever had is data, evidence, proof that the shape of wholeness is not foreign to you. You would not recognize it in a stone cottage or a lamplit kitchen if some blueprint of it were not already alive in you. So instead of chasing the next place that might give you the feeling again, consider tending the enclosure you are already standing inside, your own daily life, your own walls, your own hearth, built not of stone but of attention, of a room made quietly yours, of a rhythm that gathers you instead of scattering you. And notice too that this building is never finished all at once. It is a lamp bought this week, a chair turned toward the light next week, a habit of sitting still instead of standing rushed, small deposits into the same old ancient shape, until one day you walk back into your own home and feel, unexpectedly, the very thing you once flew across an ocean, chasing. I say, the home I keep looking for outside of me is waiting for me to build it within. Here is the whole picture. The feeling is recognition without content. The pattern is empty until a picture fills it. The deepest recognition touches a cellar older than your own biography. The feeling was never a map to a new address. The pattern beneath it may be pointing forward as much as backward, and the truest home it was ever describing was the one still being built inside you. One key, turning the same old lock from 6 different angles, and every place that ever made your chest go quiet with recognition was doing you a kindness. It was showing you, briefly, cheaply, without asking anything of you yet, what your own finished wholeness might one day feel like to stand inside. I make the unconscious conscious, and so the ache for a place I have never seen was never really about the place. It was the oldest part of me, asking, gently, when will you build me a room of my own? Why do some places feel like home instantly? Perhaps because home was never a location at all, but a shape I have been carrying, unfinished, waiting for me to notice it long enough to begin